All right, y'all, we got my top 3 mass builders. I put a mass there, hopefully, so you click on this, because who just wants a little bit of muscle? We want mass. So my top 3 mass builders for hamstring. I really don't even want to say that these are the top 3 best exercises. I like to say that it's the top 3 best place to start. And again, what's the difference? Is it a matter of semantics? Well, the difference is, any good coach or any good trainer absolutely has kind of his go-to exercises. And again, no one's going to imagine that, random people come in and you're going to have 100 different exercises for 100 different people. So on paper, we want a good place to start. And if we're trying to build muscle, the goal is really having a lot of well-directed force, so things that allow the muscle training to produce a ton of internal force. And the whole point of it being well-directed, meaning, we don't want it going somewhere else. We don't want the opportunity for something else to do the work. So even if something you can move a whole lot of weight on, you look at the way maybe a power lifter bench presses, with the kind of elbows tucked, using a lot of everything, using chest, triceps, shoulders. That might be a great way to move a lot of weight to have a lot of force production, but it might not be isolated as much as maybe a bodybuilder would want to do if he's trying to target just his chest, or if he's trying to target just his triceps or front delts. So that's kind of the stem of all this, is 3 top exercises that are going to allow you to get a lot of force production for your hamstrings where they are the strongest, and hopefully have not a lot of other stuff get involved. So my number 1 pick for hamstrings is going to be a seated leg curl. Why the seated leg curl? Right away, you're going to get some people that anytime you don't have a free weight exercise, it's blasphemy. The main reason that I want to see the leg curl is because, 1, it trains your muscles, it trains your hamstrings where they are strongest. So again, you don't have to know all the detail of this, but if you understand a little bit about length-tension relationship, you're more than welcome to look that up. It's a term that I didn't make up. It's been around for a minute. Your muscles are strongest in the mid and lengthened ranges and weakest in the shortened position. So that's kind of a pillar of some of my training, is you want exercises that overload where you are strongest and you can have the most force production. So that's one of the great things about the seated leg curl, is that it overloads the hamstrings and they're fully lengthened right through their mid-range. So it's where they're strongest, and it actually doesn't get to the position where your hamstring is near fully shortened. Because the hamstring crosses over your knee and because it crosses over your hip, what you need to have happen in some degree of both is you need to be hip flexed, because hip flexion, all other things being the same, lengthens the hamstring, and you need your knee to be extended, because again, all other things being the same, as you extend your knee, your hamstring lengthens. So you need hip flexion and knee extension, both the combination at some sort of end range, to have your hamstrings fully lengthened. So that is the position that happens when you are in the seated leg curl. On top of that, aside from the range of motion, it's isolated. So as we're going to get into my next exercise choice, you'll find out even though the next exercise choice is great, it's not nearly as isolated. If you do the seated leg curl properly, basically the only other muscle that can even be remotely involved is your gastroc, your calf. So you're pretty much completely taking your back out of it, you're completely taking your hips out of it, and again, only knee flexors can actually do any work. And again, your hamstring by far is your strongest knee flexor, and again, your gastrocs and your calves can do a little bit on top of that as well too. So if you use it properly, it has to be a seated leg curl with a thigh pad. If you don't have the thigh pad, you're losing a lot of the stability, you're losing a lot of the bracing. So again, you want to have that thigh pad, you want to have it smashed down tight, and it is an added bonus if you have a seat belt. Great place to use a seat belt, because if you look at the direction the leg curl actually pulls from the start, the leg curl is pulling you up, right? It's on an arc, so the direction it pulls actually changes. So when it pulls you up, you want something to smash into an opposition so you can smash into the thigh pad. So again, smashing into the thigh pad when you start, it'll make sure that right when you move, all of it is on your hamstrings and not somewhere else. And then as you continue to curl through and the direction that it pulls actually changes, so actually it's pulling this direction at the bottom, which wants to slide your whole body forward. If you have a seatbelt, that keeps you locked in place. If you don't have a seatbelt, you'll see in a lot of these, I press my hands into the handles. So again, as I want to slide forward, press my hands into the handles, and it keeps me from sliding forward. So again, it is a great one because it trains the hamstrings where they're extremely strong. It's very well isolated. It aligns well, meaning again, most of all the force production is going to go mainly to your hamstrings, and you're taking a lot of stuff out of the equation. You're taking your back out of the equation. You're taking other hip muscular out of the equation. You're taking your glutes out. You're taking your adductors out of the equation. So that is my top pick. And again, a huge mistake with leg curls is that people go light on them. And you'll see in most of the videos of any clips that I have in here is you need to go as heavy as humanly possible. So same as every other exercise, a great exercise on paper is only as good as how well you do it and how progressively you do it. So over time, once you get your form standardized and standardized to very good form, then you need to progress loads, progressive overload over time, increase strength, increase volume, again, depending on which one tends to work better for you. My next pick is probably the ones people thought I was going to say first, which is going to be basically a stiff leg deadlift. So a variation of a deadlift where your knees are fixed and you're going until you run out of hip flexion. So again, this is a great exercise for the same reason as the first one. It trains your hamstrings where they are strongest. So from their fully lengthened position, again, if you imagine both of those, if you imagine the position in a seated leg curl where your knees are straight, and you imagine the position at the bottom of a stiff leg deadlift or a fixed knee deadlift, you're in the same position. So your knees are extended and your hips are at the end of their amount of flexion. And so again, that's where your hamstrings are fully lengthened. So it has a lot of load there and still has a lot of load through that mid range. The only reason this is number 2 and not number 1 is there's a lot of other stuff involved. So again, all the weight that goes from your hands has to literally travel through your arms and through your entire torso. So again, a lot of upper back musculature is involved, a lot of lower back musculature is involved, and that can be the weak link in the chain. Sometimes someone could have such strong hamstrings or vice versa, such a weak back that the back fails every single time before we can actually get as much force production to those hams as possible. Additionally, you also have other hip extensors. So again, yes, your hamstrings absolutely can extend the hips, but so can your glutes and so can your adductors. And arguably your glutes are always going to be much better hip extensors even than the hamstrings, just for mechanical reasons, the way that the glutes cross over your hip joint. So again, that's one of the just considerations. Obviously, it's my number 2 pick, so I still think it is a great exercise for growing hamstrings. But again, for those reasons and also for a huge amount of evidence. So again, I work with a lot of bodybuilders, and depending on the type of individual, some people when they're doing any type of hip flexion, hip extension, have a hard time not feeling their glutes. So again, a lot of people want to do deadlift variations for their glutes. So some people, when they're trying to do their hamstrings, they basically can't get their glutes not to work. So I've seen lots of populations where people get extremely strong at stiff leg deadlifts, RDL variations, whatever it may be, but their glutes keep getting bigger and bigger. And so again, some of the strongest deadlifters I've ever seen can have massive glutes, massive erectors, and relative to their profession, just mediocre hamstrings. So again, those are just some considerations. And again, when it's on an individual basis, this is where it really I could flip-flop those 1 and 2. Basically meaning if I have someone that tells me when they're doing RDLs, they get a ton out of their hamstring, they can show me from their physique evidence that their hamstrings work, then absolutely that could be an exercise they start with first. But it's very common to look at guys that have been smashing away at deadlifts for years, their hamstrings don't show it, and I say, hey, we gotta switch some stuff around here. Start with seated leg curls, make that your priority, and absolutely still program your deadlift variations in there as well. And the third variation is going to be a lying leg curl. And so again, what's the difference between a lying leg curl and a seated leg curl? You're in a more hip extended position. Depending on the hamstring or the lying leg curl that you have, you might be fully hip extended, you might be in just a little bit of hip flexion, but either way you are more hip flexed, more hip extended, which means that your hamstrings are actually capable of getting to a fully shortened position. So again, they're actually getting to that range where they're a little bit weaker, but the start of the exercise, right through the vast majority of it, right until you're at full knee flexion, still overloads the hamstrings where they're kind of in that mid-range and are absolutely strong. So it is a very, very good variation. I still use them regularly, but for the reason that it doesn't overload your hamstrings where they're fully lengthened, it does actually get to the position where they're fully shortened, I would give it not quite as much force production available compared to the first 2 exercises. And then also compared to the first exercise, even though there's more stuff out of the equation, obviously your erectors to a certain extent aren't nearly taxed as much as a deadlift, neither are your hip musculature and your glutes. Still, there's this kind of seesaw effect. So as you go through the curl, the thing kind of wants to tip your whole body. So I'm sure you've seen people do lying leg curls, their butt lifts up a whole lot. That's literally if you just had a fixed amount of knee flexion and held it, the weight is still trying to basically pull your hips up, pull your pelvis off of the pad. So there is still a stability component involved. You need to pull yourself in tight and lock yourself in place. There's a lot of demands on yourself and your own musculature to keep your back still, to keep your pelvis in place. So again, it's just because of those additional demands and other stuff going on, sometimes you're limited to how much you can get to your hamstrings because you have to spend more time and effort stabilizing. So again, with all of these, I use all of them. So again, if I had someone whose goal was to bring up their hamstrings, it's very common that this might be a hamstring day in and of itself in this exact order. They might have seated leg curls to start, RDL, stiff leg variation from there. And then at the end, they may have a lying leg curl, and then might finish off with something else that involves the hams a little bit in hip extension, maybe like a high stance on a leg press, a lunge variation. So again, those things still obviously have a place. There's a couple other exercises I, of course, left off the list, which can be good exercises, but like the thing would indicate, this is my top 3 best exercises, best place to start. And the only thing I would say from there is, avoid redundancy elsewhere. So there's going to be some exercises that people will see other leg curl variations. What about a kneeling leg curl? The ones where you basically are standing upright, you have a knee somewhere. Just realize that's not a bad exercise, but it's pretty much the exact same thing as a lying leg curl turned on its side. And so now what else do you have to manage here? Or at least when you're doing a lying leg curl, gravity is helping keep your body still and pressed into the pad. You don't have to manage as much stuff because body weight literally holds you in place. As soon as you go into this upright position in a kneeling leg curl, now you don't have gravity even helping push your body into the pad. So you have extra additional stabilizing in there. Again, not a completely horrible exercise, but for me, I don't see the purpose of it if you're doing a lying leg curl on top of that. So that is my top 3 pick. And like I already said, of course, this could be a complete hamstring exercise or a hamstring workout in and of itself. I would actually advise it. And as always, if you enjoy the content, please share. Please leave your comments and feedback below. Obviously, if you can make them better, have at it. Let me know and I'll try and make the videos better. If you're having a bad day, as always, feel free to comment and give me some insults and tell me that my arms are small and all that good stuff, and hopefully it makes your day better. But otherwise, share, hit the subscribe buttons that are all over the place, and until the next one.